Bases dropped. Soccer Down here, live, April 27th. It's show like 542 in this new world of self-isolation / quarantine / whatever you want to call it. And maybe people are starting to go a little stir-crazy. But we've got news. We've got updates. We've got speculation, maybe a little innuendo thrown in for good measure. Lots of things are starting to bubble up in Europe about potential dates to start training, potential dates to maybe even start playing games. And then the Netherlands has shut it all down, and they have declared their season null and void. The dreaded null and void has happened, and there's some different reasons for that, and we'll get into all of that today on the show, along with your questions, your comments. You can join the conversation on Twitter, at Soccer Down here. Tweet at us. Let us know what your weekend was like, where your soccer brain is at on a Monday. John is cursing his computer again, which is typical. It's a normal Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Had all my windows open.
Do you still have Mountain Dew? That's the number one question.
Damn right.
Okay. You're not drinking Mountain Lightning or whatever it is.
Oh, and by the way, for the record, I actually looked at the label and tried to sample the product over the weekend just to see what it was.
Fair shake?
Just to kind of see what it was like. I got about a half a cup in before it started to give me my mellow yellow headache that I hadn't, really had since
your mellow yellow headache?
Too much sugar. There's actually a drink that had too much sugar in it.
Okay.
And Mellow Yellow had too much sugar, and I could never finish it because it would always give me a headache.
Huh.
Mountain Lightning was the same way. I literally got half a cup in and had a massive sugar headache and poured the rest of it down the drain. I was done. And I actually looked at the back and read the label. If you have 1 cup of Mountain Lightning,
just a measuring cup,
just 1 serving, whatever they consider a serving.
Oh, okay, no, that's different.
If you have a serving of Mountain Lightning, I got through half a serving of Mountain Lightning before I got a headache. But if you have an entire serving of Mountain Lightning, that gives you 100% of your daily added sugar intake as recommended by the FDA.
Oh, dude, sweet.
Yeah. And I mean, as I sit here and stare at Mountain Dew, it is 20 calories less per serving and 8% added sugars. It's only 92% of your added sugar recommended daily allowance. Total carbs, less. Sodium, less. No fat in Mountain Dew, by the way.
Well, that's, I think, to be expected.
We could hope, considering that damn sugar creates as much fat for folks as anything else does.
Yeah, but I think it's measured a little differently.
But yeah, the Mountain Lightning gave me an absolute headache halfway through drinking my 1 serving of the day. So if anybody is a fan of Mountain Lightning, I will leave the excess Mountain Lightning that was purchased in our driveway at Office HD, and if anybody wants it, they can come get it.
Yeah, you can put that on next door and say, free Mountain Lightning. Come get it now.
Hey, well, we do have some we do have some high school students who live next to us here in the subdivision. So it's like, hey guys, you want more sugar added to your day? Do you want to yell that much louder when you're playing video games? Here, have this.
Yeah, sounds about right.
But that's just me.
Yeah, it's weird. So you mentioned video games. I've been playing FIFA a decent bit as I'm trying to get better at it, first off. And just started a season with Atlanta United, and you start getting into teams coming in and buying your players and all that, which is always fun. But what I've noticed is that I am assuming Jossie Zardes, Carlos Vela, and who was the other player who really stood out to me? Pretty much all of the Seattle Sounders they must have something on the raters or designers on the MLS section of the game, because Jossie Zardes is the greatest player in the history of the planet in FIFA.
So he's like Bo Jackson Tecmo Bowl?
It's pretty close. It's pretty close. And I've been a longtime defender of Jossie Zardes. I think he takes way too much nonsense from people. But, wow. If he played like he did on FIFA, he would be running the planet. I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Well, yeah, they've got to have some kind of an inroad to the designers. It's like, yo, dog, make me a 92.
Yeah. Yeah, make me be able to dribble past everybody, because that's something I've always wanted to do.
Nathan Pugh, by the way, agrees with me.
On?
Mellow yellow headache, too much sugar, quite rightly.
I don't think I've ever had a headache from too much sugar in anything. The only beverage that ever gave me a headache was Miller Lite. Miller Lite.
Understandable.
Well, no, it's weird because, I mean, Bud Light didn't, Coors Light didn't, Michelob Light back in the day didn't. Like, none of the others did. No other beer does, but couldn't finish a glass, can, bottle of Miller Lite without getting a headache. It was almost the same, like halfway through. It's like, nope. Never understood.
So it's... I tried to give Mountain Lightning the benefit of the doubt, but it is priced where it's priced for a reason.
When I chuck it all in and go get a hut in the mountains and start moonshining, I'm gonna call it Mountain Lightning.
See, that's what that's what I'm thinking. It's like, when you're thinking of moonshine and revenuers and old 1930s Fords that go, that have souped up engines and go driving through the woods, and all those stereotypes from the movies of the 50s. That's what Mountain Lightning. Yeah, and you get the clear bottle of which, and Mountain Dew, by the way, did market Mountain Dew in those clear bottles a couple of years ago, clear glass, and they had the handle and everything.
Oh, yeah, no, Mountain Dew did the throwback. Everybody did their throwbacks with, I think, real sugar instead of processed.
Yeah.
Some of them were better than others. Some of them you just get used to the current taste, and you don't like the other one as much. So,
but don't drink Mountain Dew Zero. Do not.
That just, I don't like really any of the zeros.
Awful.
That's just me.
No. Awful. Awful.
No good.
So we have restarts allegedly.
Allegedly, we have plans, and we have one league that right after we went off the air on Friday announced that it was all done, and they're in a different situation all the way around. So you can't necessarily see this one and say, oh well, this is what everybody should do. The Netherlands, the Eredivisie has been declared null and void. I think they tried to find some kind of language to honor Ajax for being at the top of the table on goal differential, but they're not the champions. Nobody's getting relegated. There was an initial report, because it is in his contract, that if Den Haag stayed up, Alan Pardew, who I forgot was even there, he would get a £100,000 bonus. And he came out immediately afterwards and said, that's not the case. If I do get a bonus, because I didn't do anything to keep him up, I'm donating it to good causes in the Netherlands, which is great to hear. They should have went down. They should have been relegated. Teams in the second division should have went up. That's not going to happen. They're basically going to act like the season did not happen in the Netherlands. And there's people who are not happy about this, as you would expect, because they played most of a season. But in the Netherlands, and correct me if I'm wrong, the government has come out and said there will be no sporting events, and I don't think they drew a line between with the public and without the public. They said there would be no sporting events before September 1st.
Yeah.
That makes it a little trickier, especially with everyone else moving into this direction of starting to look at when training can resume. And once you do that, then starting to look at when games can resume. And yeah, if everybody else is looking to play and the Netherlands can't resume anything until September 1st, then that might be hard from a timeline perspective. Maybe still a little early to go null and void, but we'll see in the long run if it shakes out.
Statement from KNVB. Unfortunately, with the Cabinet's most recent corona measures, it has become impossible to complete the 2019-2020 season of professional football competitions in time. It will be crystal clear to everyone involved, from supporters and players to directors and referees, that public health always comes first. The Professional Football Board, after consulting clubs, players, and coaches, and with the approval of the Supervisory Board, has decided to stop the 1920 competition and to allow the allocation of European club football seats based on the current league table. This is in accordance with UEFA guidelines in relation to promotion and demotion. It has been decided not to promote and not to be demoted.
So they are deciding the European qualifiers based off the table. They are not having promotion relegation. As we've said, there's not going to be some magic way to solve any of this, which is not going to happen. But this feels like maybe one of the most unfortunate ways, because teams that I think the conversation to mitigate this feeling has been to promote and not relegate. But the Netherlands said they would not have a 20-team first division. The Eredivisie has 18, and they weren't going to do it. So once you took that off the table, well, then this is the only way you can go if you're going to call it like this, unless you're going to have just promotion relegation based off the current spots. Now, the other hybrid that it seems like UEFA might be kind of pushing towards is the idea of having a playoff system, but that would mean playing games, to determine promotion relegation. And that's going to be bonkers if it happens, first off. And these games are going to be crazy, and we'll see what happens. But it's, in some ways, you're starting to feel like action is getting closer. And we'll talk about Italy, we'll talk about Germany. But you also get this from the Netherlands that just shows you how complicated it is across the board.
Eredivisie has put Ajax forward, this is from Sky, to go directly to the playoffs of the Champions League, with AZ playing in the second qualifying round. Third place Feyenoord goes into the group stage of Europa League, PSV and Willem II qualifying for the second qualifying round of the competition. AZ released a statement saying they're considering their options after indicating displeasure with the judgment, particularly in relation to the awarding of European places. Their statement started with, "We've been trying for weeks in the background to elaborate multiple scenarios to prevent the situation we are now in." AZ asked Friday afternoon, just as with promotion relegation, to first investigate support for the exact method of implementation, but the KNVB, the Dutch FA, immediately rejected this. The KNVB asked that support Friday afternoon when it comes to the decision for promotion relegation. We are considering this situation, end quote.
So, first off, this is kind of a funny one because this comes up as we talk about teams that maybe people are getting used to. So, Alkmaar, which is the full name. I have heard Alkmaar, it more commonly AZ, and that's because more commonly I've heard it from an British English speaker. Right. And that's how it's generally referred to. I don't know in the Netherlands, and I know we have a few Dutch listeners and European listeners out there. When you guys say it in English, is it AZ or is it AZ? I'd be curious, because I've always heard AZ, even though we don't say Zed here, but that's how I've always heard it called from even American people talk about the game. So I'm just curious what the accepted shortening is.
Because I've heard AZ Alkmaar. I have not heard AZ.
Well, I don't know why you haven't heard AZ, but that's how it's been referred to a lot. So I don't know. I'm not saying there's a right way or wrong way. There probably isn't, but I'd just be curious what's more accepted.
Yeah. Settlement of places for European competition next season is subject to ratification by UEFA. Ajax say they abstained from a vote on promotion and relegation and will attempt to help other clubs suffering financially because of the coronavirus crisis.
And we'll see if they can. I know they did pretty well in the transfer market after their run in the Champions League and brought in a lot of revenue, so they're probably sitting pretty, but they're also not a club with a ton of reserves. They have a lot of turnover year to year, so how much are they actually going to be able to do? We don't know. I mean, that's what's hard. The way the vote went, and this is a really important element of it, the vote did not come to a conclusion. The Dutch Federation is the one who actually settled on the outcome of this. And that's why some have been a little upset. You had some, teams abstain. You had teams vote, to just accept the table as it was. You had all kinds of things. So nothing was truly resolved, and the Federation had to step in and make a final decision.
Yeah, and Edwin van der Sar, who, what's his official title with
CEO,
Ajax CEO Edwin van der Sar, was quoted as saying, as the largest club in the Netherlands, we think it makes sense that we offer help within the industry. We abstain from voting because clubs can take advantage of voting in a certain way. We therefore believe that this should have been at the KNVB, the Dutch FA.
You're looking right now, coronavirus pandemic damages are estimated to be at 300 million euro, could go up to 400 million euro. And the Federation has appealed to the government for help. I'm getting the translation now. And this is from the professional clubs. They said the loss of income could reach up to 400 million euro. They've asked for the government. They said, professional football director Eric Gouda, we are sounding the alarm about the consequences for our sector. We ask you to work with us to find creative, realistic, and available solutions for professional football. Let's see. They've tried to do things in the build-up to create emergency funds, et cetera, and you've kind of gone past that. So, according to the Federation, the termination of the current season's already losing 96 million euro, but all restrictions around the start of the new year would cause no less than 204 million euro in damage, and that's not all. Another 60 to 100 million euro in transfer profits will be missed, and this is very important when you talk about the Netherlands, because you have a lot of clubs that produce players and sell them on, and that's a big part of their yearly budget is transfer sales. And you might not have a traditional transfer market. You might not have many teams that are in a position to buy. So that's going to be another huge, huge factor. And that's going to be a big part of this discussion in some countries. The Netherlands would be a major one there. Also, Gode said, we must ensure that we do not isolate Dutch professional football within Europe. This would seriously damage the athletic position of Dutch clubs for a longer period. And that's talking about how Germany, Spain, Italy, England, they're developing protocols to continue playing. In the Netherlands, they're not, but they don't want to get left behind, because then they'd get even further down. The transfer part would be an issue. All the losses would be an issue, and then you'd have a lot stronger residual effect if the Dutch game is held back further while others start playing. That's another big element of this and that's what's hard for a UEFA is different countries have different situations. Different countries will be able to play at different times, but if some countries and some leagues get left behind, it's going to do damage, and maybe irreparable damage, about a league's overall standing. And that's something you have to worry about if you're a UEFA.
As a rule, I think one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is the transfer market and the new normal. We have leagues who are looking at the possibility, Sky Bet Championship, League One, et cetera, League Two, looking at salary caps. And I know that I think looking at Derek Ray's Twitter timeline as he was monitoring Bundesliga, I think that he had mentioned that there were some higher ups in the league attached to some of the franchises, possibly thinking of a new normal with salary caps and things like that. So for me going forward, that's the part that I'm going to be looking at the most, the transfer market, how it's impacted, how deeply it's impacted, and then how leagues in turn will sit there and respond to the new economic normal when it comes to the idea of a possible salary cap in leagues and which leagues will go down that road.
Yeah, that's going to be a question, and it's going to be something that will be considered by some leagues, and I think somebody will have one. I don't know if any of the top leagues will, because I think they kind of still have the bulletproof mentality, but somebody's going to do it. And I think they could potentially strengthen their overall league by doing it. And that's the big question here. This is going to change the game. It's going to change the leagues. It's going to change everything in a big way. But how do you respond to it? Is this change, do you look at it as an opportunity? Because it could end up being that in a lot of ways. It could end up being an opportunity for leagues to get things maybe a little more structured for modern times. Let's put it that way. Because there are some leagues that could probably use a salary cap to ensure the long-term viability of their clubs. It's a fact. I mean, why did salary caps come in the first place in the United States? Like, they didn't come in just because, this sounds like a good idea I read about one time, and let's just do it. Yeah, let's just do it. What was the first league to do a salary cap? Do you remember?
Ooh. I
want to say the National
Hockey. Oh, okay, because I was going to say the National Hockey League.
It could have been the NHL. It'd be the same reasoning for both because of the timing when it came in. Neither one was in a real strong position at the time. You had teams that were spending more than their means, and you had teams that were in bad business shape because this was in the 80s, correct?
Yes.
And the NBA was starting to come out of it with the, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird coming into the league, and later Michael Jordan, but you had the cap in place by then. In the NHL, you had it, and I think they both looked at it a little differently in the way they structured it, but it came in because teams were in trouble. That was the whole point. So now is the time where you're going to have teams that are in trouble. You're going to have leagues that are in trouble, and you're going to need to have some way to structure the business side. So I'll be really curious to see what we get out of this. A little bit more on the Netherlands. So De Graafschap, I believe, is one of the clubs that would have been promoted. And they are not going to be promoted now with the decision. And their CEO called that decision a puppet show. And he said that Eric Goode, the director of professional football for the Dutch Federation, wanted to hang up the phone after he told the clubs what decision was made. The quote is, "He tried to run away like a thief at night." That's the next step we're going to get out of this, is you're going to get these kinds of conversations about, we got screwed. And they did. I mean, there's just no other way around it. They did. They absolutely got screwed because they would have been promoted, and they're not going to be. And that's not a good thing at all. But you got here because the Federation had a vote that 16 teams voted in favor of promotion relegation. 9 voted against it, and 9 abstained. And according to the way the voting procedures are done in the Netherlands, meant there was no decision. And it went down to the Federation to make the decision. And they went against the majority. And it's something to consider as to why they did that. And I have not seen a reasoning from the league side of it.
Yeah.
You've had, some clubs come out and say, they should have stopped it. And, Ajax is one. Again, it's understandable. Like, they don't lose anything by this. Mark Overmars, their director of football, said the Eredivisie is dead. Why are we putting money over public health? There were reports that the decisions were already made the day before, but the clubs were allowed to vote anyway. And since there was no decision, then the decision was already made by the federation. The teams that were reportedly in favor of stopping the league immediately were the teams that were either not going to be hurt by it or the teams that were going to gain from it, like ADO Den Haag, who wasn't going to get relegated in this situation. That's the reality of these types of decisions, is whenever you're going to stop the season in this way and make that decision and not have promotion relegation based on the current table or not set up some kind of playoff or whatever, you're not going to be able to get it right. Because it's not right that a team, I believe it was a Camber in the second division, dominated the second division. I mean, running away with it. There's no question they would have been promoted. And now that season is a waste for them. And we all know how this stuff goes. Can they guarantee that next year they'll have that kind of season again and get promoted anyway? No. You can't. So does that feel good? No. I don't know if there was a better solution in the Dutch situation because of the government ruling about sporting events. And that's what makes this one so complicated. Other countries who could play a playoff, okay, maybe you declare the season null and void, but you have a playoff between teams to determine promotion relegation. Maybe you just declare champions. Maybe you have a playoff between the top teams in the division because you can't finish the season out, so you have the top four have a playoff system. Whatever. There's ways to solve it on the field. This case, it appears that the Dutch Federation decided there's no way for us to solve this on the field, and we don't want to get left behind everybody else, so this is what we're going to do. And it stinks. It stinks for the teams that would have been promoted. It stinks for the teams that would have been able to play their way into European competition. It stinks for a lot of teams. There's a few who do benefit from it, the ones who don't get relegated. But outside of that, it feels like it stinks for more than it helps.
Yeah, and this is the other thing to keep in mind is that it's not every country is going to be the same when it comes to how they're going to implement decision making and the end decision. So we've seen the Dutch decision, and the Dutch decision may not apply to country X, might apply to country Y, but understand that this is going to be case by case, and it's going to look different, and it's going to be a challenge for each country, each federation, and the leagues that are attached, trying to figure out what is the best for us, juggling all the factors that we've been talking about over the last handful of weeks, all of the external factors, all of those intangibles that we talked about. What's the best thing for our country going forward, and then sports falling in line?
I don't know if they're separate all the time, and that's not because I'm giving sports an overinflated role, but I think it has to go hand in hand. I don't think it's one without the other, because sport is a big part of the country.
No question.
So to say that you just you put sport to the side and worry about everything else, I think we're seeing at this stage of everything that, one, there's definitely a big craving for normalcy, and sport's a big part of that. I think we've seen it in the reaction to the Last Dance on ESPN, the ratings that they have gotten, the ratings that the NFL draft got. I mean, people are craving something live that helps them escape, and that's what sport can be for a lot of us. Is sport can be that escape. So to just say that it's not part of the conversation, to say that you can't factored in. I don't think that's necessarily fair. And I think you're also seeing, take sport out of it and put business into it or the economy into it, and that has to factor in as well. I mean,
Yep.
It can't necessarily be the number one driver and everything else is to the side, but it's part of the conversation.
And how much of an economic driver is, I was just going to say, how much of an economic driver is sport in all of this discussion?
Oh, it is.
It's
I
big.
mean, it definitely is, and it's an industry that you might be able to come up with a safe way to get back on the field before you have people in the stands and figure out that next step, and that will be an economic driver potentially. It could help with that part of it, and this is reality, and it's not being insensitive, it's not being reckless, it's just, it is part of the conversation. It's a big conversation. That's the world these days, and that's what everybody's trying to figure out. But I think every country has its own challenges.
Right.
You have different levels of infection. You have countries who have handled it better than others. If I remember correctly, the Netherlands was one of the countries that basically tried to ignore it for the longest period of time, and they went longer with the herd immunity idea than most did. And that could be one reason why they've decided to scrap, sporting events until September 1st. Whereas, a country like Germany handled it pretty well early on, and they're at a position where they're being measured, but they're looking at what those next steps are. Italy is looking at what those next steps are and trying to figure out, okay, is it May 18th, which is right now on the calendar as the first day that you could have training sessions? And that brings up another question, and we've seen it from two different sides here this morning. Reportedly, FIFA is going to allow 5 substitutions per game until the end of 2021. It's a proposal on the table with IFAB, and that tells you two things. One, they understand that leagues are probably going to have to play a more condensed schedule to finish the current season. But two, to do this through the end of 2021, potentially this could go on longer or go away and then come back, whatever, in terms of how leagues get stopped, how competitions get stopped, and how you have to figure it out. They're giving some wiggle room here for IFAB. We'll see if it gets passed. I would assume that it would if this is coming down from FIFA as a proposal. And this hit at Sky Sports today, and it's made the rounds around every country. So we'll see what it ends up looking like. But then the flip side was an interesting comment from Julian Lopetegui. Now, this is in Marca in Spain. Translated, he said, "We need at least 5 weeks preparation to be able to play a match every 3 days, and that is difficult to understand and never seen before. There is a precedent in the NFL from 2011 where there was a suspension of 3 months because of lockout, and that led to 12 ruptured Achilles in a month." Now, Lopetegui's not 100% on top of this, but there are studies out there about that issue, that lockout. Now, that lockout in the NFL happened in the spring. It happened from March to July, March 11th to July 25th. Players did not have normal access to their team's healthcare providers, strength and conditioning folks, coaches. So then they came into training camp fairly quickly at the end of July. Let's see, 2 days after the end of the lockout. And then they had a normal preseason competition. So it was a different situation and probably was handled just incredibly poorly by clubs. I think this is a little different. I think this is a different situation, but it does bring up that possibility is if you don't take the time for teams to train and get back into fitness, guys can do the individual stuff, and that's very important because it's not like the lockout situation where the strength and conditioning coach and the position coach could not talk to the player. This is different. They can talk to him all day, and they can. You've got teams that have the Fitbits kind of stuff with players now. So they're getting data on what the players are doing. So it's not quite the same situation. But if you rush back, you do run the risk for more injury. So you've got FIFA looking at it, allowing more substitutions. You've got a coach in Spain talking about if you come back too quick, we're going to have players get hurt. This is the next step. And this is the next part of the conversation is, okay, now we can safely play games behind closed doors. Now we can start to work towards that. But what do we have to do to get there on the field? And 5 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever that timeline is, there's going to be a ramp-up period because there has to be for player health.
Now, just because David Luiz shows up at Arsenal's training camp this morning, doesn't mean that he is going to be match ready instantaneously.
No, nobody's saying that. But here's the big difference, and this is the big part of it, is Arsenal and their coaches have not been pounding Guinnesses during this break.
No.
They've been talking to their players. I would assume players have some form of whatever it is that is sending data back to the club for their training. I'm sure they're giving individual workouts. Are they doing them? Well, if they're getting measured, then they are, or they're faking them or whatever. If they're not, then it's going to show and they're not going to get picked. I mean, nobody's saying, like, just go back to training and play a game this weekend.
Right.
But how long and how you handle it, I would hope that, Lopetegui and Sevilla has found a way for constant communication with the players, making sure that they are keeping their fitness up. If you go back to an article that we had a while back talking about what that could look like in England, they actually had players wind down a little bit, or at least this was the idea that they would do it, wind down a bit and then start to ramp back up in the next couple of weeks before they come back into training. Basically kind of go into off-season mode and then come back into preseason mode. And we'll see if that's what more clubs do or if that's the next step. So it's looking like whether it's Italy or England right now, the idea is mid-May or so to begin training again. Germany is ahead of that. Spain could be behind that. Spain, it's looking like games might not get played until the summer. The Netherlands has already canceled it. We've not heard an update from the top flight in Scotland yet. Bulgaria is along the same pathway of Italy and England, looking at mid-May to get back to training. So it kind of varies, country to country, league to league.
You mentioned the 5 substitution rule, and that's something that we've been discussing for weeks, is that because of the anticipated schedule compression and the rapid-fire nature of an anticipated schedule to get things finished by date X, that you would need to have those extra players on the roster for fitness.
No. That's a completely different thing. We were talking about extra players on a roster. This is 5 substitutions in a match, not 3. That's 2 different conversations. We were talking about it from an MLS roster construction standpoint where you needed to be able to have a deeper pool to pick your game day roster from. What this is saying is, you're 18, you can use 5 instead of 3 substitutes. That's a big difference.
Yeah,
I don't think it's as big of a difference as playing 7-inning doubleheaders. Like, that completely changes the structure of a game, or playing, less time in a game. I think this is a much better way of handling it. But yeah, these are the next steps. This is a much bigger step than having a deeper roster to pull from. This is a big deal. This is something that FIFA does not really do lightly. I mean, we'll go back, like research I've been doing about U.S. World Cup bids. One of the big issues between the United States and FIFA in the early 80s was the North American Soccer League allowed 3 substitutions. Well, you hear that now, and it's like, well, duh, that's what everybody does. Well, not then. You did 2. That was what was allowed in the world of football. And because of 1 substitution difference, you had FIFA threatening to put the U.S. Soccer Federation out of the organization because their top flight league was not following IFAB rules and not following the guidelines. There were other things too, like the shootout and the 35-yard offside line, but the substitutions was a big part of it. It was something that was cited many times. Eventually you added a third substitution, but soccer is the sport that I believe, now correct me in terms of rugby or others, but I think soccer is the sport that has the most restrictive substitution rules. So for them to even consider going to 5, that's a big deal. And that shows the effects that this is going to have once we get back to play.
And wouldn't, and I'm trying to remember the articles that I saw about it yesterday, is that they would allow those substitutions, but only at specific times of the match, including halftime, just because of the proposed bulk substitutions that could happen?
Well, let's see what Sky said, because I don't know how far down the actual logistics. So 3 slots plus the halftime break to make their changes. So it's not about bulk substitutions, it's about stoppages in play. They don't want the 5 substitutions to make the actual time of the match be longer. So let me see if they get into detail or if they just said at certain times. You also get the additional substitution during extra time where relevant. It would cover next season as well as the current campaign. It would also apply to all international matches until the end of next year. That would include Euro 2020. They didn't go into detail, but so halftime and 3 slots in the game, which is kind of weird. I'd like more detail on that and how that would look. So you'd only have designated times that you could make a substitution. It's not about, you have a throw in or anything like that. There would be certain timing points in the match that you could make substitutions. Halftime, obviously, there's no stoppage of play there. But 3 other times in a match that you could do it. So this adds a real complication for a manager. I'd be curious how they feel about that trade-off. You get 2 more subs, but you're not allowed to sub whenever you need to or want to. You can only do it
only
at certain
sub,
times.
Say, at the 75th minute or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the time or what. I don't know if it's 60, 70, 80. I no clue. That would be a big factor in this. So that part I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. Not a fan of that at all, actually, the more that I think about it, because that changes the tactics. I mean, having 5 substitutions changes the tactics. Jurgen Klinsmann can come back in and win a World Cup with that.
You and Thomas Gwynn both said that.
Yeah, I mean, he can absolutely come back and boss that, although he might need that 6th or 7th substitution, too, because he was really good with those in the 85th minute of a friendly. But you're in a situation where now, you can't think, because not a lot of managers... Some do, and coming into a game, like we talked about this with Stephen Glass for the Atlanta United 2 Tampa game that we did the watch-along on. George Bello had 45 minutes of fitness. You were measuring his fitness. He was only going to play 45. Sometimes you have an idea, 60 minutes, we're going to make a sub. This guy's got 60 minutes in him. We're going to keep an eye on him, but 60 minutes will make the sub. The Ilsinho Philadelphia Union trick, where they would bring him in right around the 60-minute mark, and that was their plan pretty much consistently. That's rare. Usually you're making substitutions based off what happens in the match, and to not have that ability, I don't really like that. I wonder if there is a in-between here that you can figure out. And that's going to be down to FIFA and IFAB to try to figure this out and figure it out quickly. And I hope that they're talking to not just league administrators, but coaches about this and figure out the right way forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, taking it to me, you're hamstringing. Is that? I guess I'm creating a word. you're hamstringing the thought pattern of a coach by saying that you can only sit there and sub at this time, and this time on the clock in addition to halftime. And you're kind of forcing them to you're forcing them to manage around a clock instead of managing around the action going on in front of them.
Yeah, it just changes the way you do it. And as with any of these kinds of things, managers who figure that out the fastest will be the most successful with it. But it's not easy.
Yeah, Thomas Gwynn says, I don't think they're saying the subs would have to be at a specific time. The managers basically have to do 2 double subs and a single sub and 1 single sub to get the 5 that would be available. Double subs aren't that uncommon anyway.
Maybe, and that's a little better, but even still, like, let's say you're managing a game and then you're forced into a double sub with your last substitution, or you don't get to use a sub. Like, there's still things about it that kind of force you into it. The Sky Sports one says teams will be afforded only 3 slots. So you could read that either way. You could read it timing, or you could read it the way Thomas mentioned it. The way Thomas mentions it is better. Still don't love it.
I was going to say, you didn't sound sold on that.
Well, no, because if you're going to use your 5 subs, you have to do double subs at certain times. And does that happen sometimes? Sure. But does it happen a lot? No. No, it's not common. It happens. I mean, it can make things difficult. I guess you don't have to use the double sub, but you lose a sub. It's weird. I mean, I understand their idea about not wanting to have unnecessary stoppages, but I think with the new law that substitutes do not come across the field to come out of the match, they can go out they can leave the field at the nearest point, so they can go out on the opposite side, they can go out on the end, whatever, and leave the field quickly. I think you lean on that, and that's what solves this, as opposed to limiting when people can make subs or having to make them in a certain way. I would much rather say, all right, we're going to be much stricter on substitution. You're leaving at the nearest point on the pitch, and if you don't, you're getting carded. And if you turn around and say something, then you're getting a second yellow, and then you're going to play shorthanded.
Yeah, I like that.
Like, I would use that as the way to control the timing more. It's just me.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that you don't restrict to those moments. It's like, look, you're over here, go. And then I like your idea of if you don't, then you get a card, and if you're still lollygagging, then you get popped a second time, and you're done. So, no, I like that idea.
My guess would be that a lot of managers would make more halftime substitutions in this. I think that's what would change, is then you would be able to do like what Atlanta United did with Bello and say, all right, we're ramping his fitness back up. We're preparing him for the U17 World Cup. So we're going to manage his minutes. They had a match coming up in midweek. You're playing 45. Guillermo Benitez came in and played the other 45. Like, you're splitting the 45, and we're going to do that sub at halftime no matter what. That kind of stuff, I think, will happen more with this. And I think that's where the extra subs are going to get used more, rather than from a tactical perspective in a match.
Yep. Other countries, when you're looking at restarts, in Spain, Health Minister Salvador Illa said that professional football is not likely to return before the summer. They've been without football since March 12th, 2 days before the entire country went into lockdown. And 22,000 lives have been lost because of the pandemic. The Spanish League has already said play won't resume before late May, and government health officials have the final say with regard to authorizing the return of sporting activities. Ia on Sunday said it would be reckless for me to say now that professional football will be back before the summer. We'll continue to monitor the evolution of the virus, and the guidelines we'll present will indicate how different activities can return to a new normalcy.
Yeah, I mean, you're at the point where Rafa Ramos, who is the president of the Association of Spanish Football Club Doctors, said that footballs and playing surfaces will have to be sterilized if matches are to resume. And the quote translated, this is in The Guardian, and he told this to El País. All the material, even the pitches, will have to be sterilized before a match, at halftime, and afterwards. It's possible to be infected by the ball, but when you are struck by a sterilized ball, it is very hard to get infected. That sounds really strange.
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily where that's coming from. Okay. I don't know how you're going to sterilize a grass field at halftime. Like, that's the kind of stuff where it's... If you're thinking that way, you're not going to be playing right now, if that's in your thought process. And right now, they're not planning on playing. I don't think that's going to end up being part of the process. The ball, from a soccer perspective, is a little different in this case than it would be from a basketball perspective, although you do have hands on the ball, on a throw-in situation. Goalkeepers have gloves that, again, you're getting down to like a lot of really wild what-ifs, and to the point that it feels like you're paralyzing yourself with fear. When you're talking about sterilizing grass fields, you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to make any logical sense as to getting, back to action. And I understand the fear. Don't get me wrong. Like, when I go to the store, I am like keeping my hands in my pockets at, the majority of the time. And if I, grab something, I make sure not to touch anything else, like that kind of stuff. Like, I'm being very careful, and I understand it, but like, this feels way over the top, and it feels like excuses not to start playing again. And the Spanish Footballers Association has been the one that I've seen this coming from as well, more than any other country, about a concern about resuming training and a concern about testing. And the players say that there are other groups who need to test more at this time. Germany's talked about not being able to resume until they have the amount of tests that they're not taking away from the general population. Maybe Spain has more of a testing issue. I don't know. But there's a balance here, and there's a very difficult decision in this, but you also have to keep your head in these things. Every bit of information that I've heard is, and I'm not a doctor, and you're hearing all this secondhand or hearing it from experts, there's very little concern about a field being something that you could catch this from, like the actual field. And then if you're trying to think, well, if somebody touches the ball and then the ball touches the field, everywhere that the ball, like, that's, from what I've heard, that's not how this works.
Yeah, I have not heard. First off, I had not heard about the notion of sterilizing a field.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how this. What are you going to have? Like a grass Zamboni, like spraying something on the field?
Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of is that you have like a pressure washer kind of device where you're trying to figure something out.
Wash grass.
But that kind of a device where you're spraying whatever it is you're supposed to spray on the grass. But it would have to be something like a lawnmower or a Zamboni, something that size, to cover every inch during halftime. And I just don't know how that's a physical possibility. But I'm not a horticulturalist or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Spain is sounding very different than Italy, than Germany, than England right now, and that's something to keep in mind, because by all accounts, they're going to be one of the last to get back to action. But, as we've talked about with all of these leagues, they need to finish the current season. Javier Tebas, the president of La Liga, has been very, bullish is the word The Guardian used. I think he's been very consistent in saying they need to finish this season for TV sponsorship purposes. So they want to get back on the field. And I don't think he's been rushing it, but they want to finish this current season. But then you get into the conversation that could be coming up more and more. Let's say Spain does not get back to action until the last date that Tebas has put forward, June 28th, to restart training. Let's go as far back as is on the table right now. So they don't start training until June 28th. They don't start playing games until August 1st.
Right.
Bundesliga could be done. Italy maybe could be done if they get back on the timeline that they're talking about. England would probably be nearing its conclusion, and Spain would just be getting started. And then what do you do if you're UEFA? Because you're going to have to, because then the next step, we've talked about all the revenue sources, and it's a big part of this conversation. TV and sponsorship is a big one, and that's an immediate one where how do you ensure that you get all of that money in? You play the rest of the season. Okay, you play the rest of the season. You get that done. All right, it's done. What is the next revenue driver that you're trying to ensure is available to clubs? The transfer window. But if Spain hasn't started their games yet, and Germany's been finished for a month, how does UEFA and FIFA create a schedule for these transfer windows to where it can actually benefit clubs? Because you can't. Unless you're going to tell Germany, now we have to wait for Spain. Or you're just going to create longer windows. And this is something that FIFA and UEFA have both tried to shorten. England, for example, went down the road of having the window close before the season started. Other countries kept it open a week or two longer, and that put England at a disadvantage. So you're not going to have them have major countries' windows closed and other windows not even open yet to begin with, because then the market doesn't really happen. You don't get the sales, and you're going to need those sales. You're going to need clubs having the ability to sell players, even if there's not as many clubs out there buying. You're going to have some clubs who have to sell players to balance the books. It's just a fact. So, first step, TV, sponsorship, finish the season for a lot of leagues. Second step, when's the transfer window open and when can we start selling players? And also guys who are out of contract, everything with signing new contracts. There's a lot of different steps. But, the transfer market is the second, and in some clubs, number one economic driver. The Netherlands, for example. You've got clubs itching for that transfer window to open because they make more money there than they do on TV.
You've got the players who've already signed the pre-contracts, and
well, no, that's a different situation, and there's really nothing you can do because that's a contract. That's signed. That's a legal document. So, by all accounts, there's nothing that UEFA and FIFA can do there. You like we talked about with the contracts, you can't unilaterally say you were under contract through June 30th. Well, now you're under contract through August. The end of August. Well, no, you have to agree to that. You didn't sign that contract. And just that's the same thing as the other. The contract ended June 30th. Well, you signed a new contract starting for July 1st. You can't say that now it starts August 1st or September 1st. You already signed it. It's a legally binding document. So that is what it is.
Because the Ziyech case is the one that's sticking in my head about his old team wanting to keep him through the end of their season.
Well,
if
they're
it
not
doesn't...
playing anymore. Netherlands.
Oh, crap. Okay, disregard.
Yeah, that's changed. There's no more games.
Yeah.
So for them, it doesn't matter. But if you're another team in the Premier League, then it's well, wait a minute. Now he's under contract to Chelsea, and they could use him to finish the season out, and that could change everything. Yep. Then you get to the next step of, does the league say that we can't register the player until the next season, which is another way around it that doesn't affect the legal contract. Like, he'll start getting paid on July 1st, but he can't play games because he's not registered with the league until the next competition. There's always something, but that, sadly, is a minor issue. That type of stuff, you're talking about a smaller number of players. Now, the lower down the table you go, the lower down the divisions you go, the more situations with this you have, but it's players who are going to be out of contract, who haven't signed pre-contracts. They're just out of contract at the end of the year. Clubs are going to have to figure out short-term extensions, or if it's just going to be the wild, wild west where, all right, player's contract is up, there's still 6 more games left, I can go sign somebody on a short-term deal for 2 months, and I'm going to go sign somebody else. Like, if that's the case, then that's the case. That's a at least third-level concern. Because number 1 is TV sponsorship. Number 2 is transfer market. Number 3 is these situations.
Yeah.
It
Retention.
can't drive the conversation. Other things are more important, sadly.
Right. Yep. Premier League, next conference calls on Friday, but resumption obviously is only going to take place with government approval. The government's next review of lockdown restrictions is due May 7, and the sport will only resume when the government is satisfied with its own measures and that they are in place.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the case in every country. You know, the government is going to drive the bigger part of the conversation because they have to. But once you start to get that all clear, or at least once you start to see the all clear on the horizon like we're seeing in Italy, well, that's what you have to work towards. You've got all kinds of different things being said about Serie A, and these are where clubs and I think leagues have to be really careful about how they manage the communication of all of this. You had a report come out that Lazio's owner said that he would accept a one-off match with Juventus to decide the Serie A title. If the season cannot be resumed, he would accept a winner-take-all championship game, because those are the 2 teams at the top of the table. They're 1 point behind Juve, 8-point buffer down to 3rd place. It's, I mean, Lazio said resuming the season would put his side at a disadvantage. I don't necessarily know how, but okay. So this is where he's taking it to a little bit of an extreme. When asked if he would accept a straight shootout between the top 2, he said, yes, I would accept it, but I never asked myself the question. He said, starting the season again disadvantages us in a way. We had made a choice, believing that we could not play on 3 fronts. We had sacrificed the Europa League because for timing and transfers, it was the most uncomfortable competition. So we would be able to play once a week while other teams played twice. If we start again, we would all play twice a week, so we would lose that advantage. Again, you start looking at like levels of how much it matters. That's very low on when you're looking at what you're going to do to restart the season. That really doesn't come up into consideration very much. That was your decision. Yes, things changed. Yes, that sucks. But we're not going to say, well, we're not going to restart Serie A because Lazio decided to punt in the Europa League and not take it seriously because they didn't think they could play a couple games a week, or they wanted the advantage of only playing once a week while everybody else around them was playing twice a week. Well, that's your choice, and it didn't work because other teams could have done the same. Other teams could have got knocked out. That's ridiculous. And to even have that come up, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So. And Lazio says that the owner says that he has an excellent structure. He already has swabs. He has serological tests. He has masks. He has all of his staff. He can do sanitation immediately. His company works in hospitals, so he's all good to go. Okay, good for him. But that's a ridiculous thing to even bring up into the conversation.
12 rounds left in Serie A. 4 other matches postponed from round 25. Italian Cup suspended after the first leg of the semifinals.
Okay, we have something kind of interesting and maybe a little bit different that could be a little fun.
Mondays with Reddit on a Monday.
Actually Monday. Good job. Ronaldinho has given his first interview since being arrested in Paraguay. I never imagined I would go through such a situation. Okay. He says he was totally surprised to have been arrested and charged with using a fake passport. Him and his brother were arrested in early March for allegedly using fake documents to enter the country. Spent 32 days in prison. Judge decided that Ronaldinho and his brother could live in a hotel in Asunción while they await trial on their charges. He spoke to ABC Color in Paraguay, and he said that him and his brother came to Paraguay to be at the launch of an online casino. That was why they came. Okay. He said, "We were totally surprised to learn that the documents were not legal. Since then, our intention has been to collaborate with the justice system to clarify the facts. From that moment until today, we have explained everything and facilitated everything that has been requested of us." Speaking of the moment he told he was going to jail, Ronaldinho said, "It was a hard blow. I never imagined that I would go through such a situation. All my life I have sought to reach the highest professional level and bring joy to people with my football." Talked about having plenty of opportunities to play football in prison. He was constantly stopped for autographs and photos, even inside the maximum security prison.
How are you signing autographs in a maximum security prison?
Well, it's not so maximum security. That's number one. He said, "The warmth, affection, and respect of all Paraguayans has been felt from the first day I arrived in the country until today, and I am very grateful. I have my faith. I always pray for things to go well, and hopefully this will be over soon." They had the interview face-to-face in the hotel. Social distancing was practiced. Protective covers were placed on microphones. Ronaldinho wore a face mask at all times, except when answering questions. He said the first thing he would do once the situation is resolved would be to go see his mom.
Right on.
That's what he said. His lawyers have previously argued that their client had been given the Paraguayan passport as a gift from a local sponsor, and he was unaware that he was doing anything wrong by using it.
I'm going to give you a gift of a passport from another country.
Okay. I know how the passport process works, and it's usually not just handed to me if it's illegal.
Nope. Uh-huh.
So... yeah, not buying all that,
Here.
Ronaldinho. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
I do buy he's going to go see his mom, but
no doubt.
I don't buy the rest of it.
No. But no, I specifically with the autograph thing, if you're in a maximum security prison, are you really allowed to have something that's a sharp object, even if you're Ronaldinho?
First off, why are you in a maximum security prison? You're Ronaldinho, and you were using a fake passport to come in the country. You're not.
Why are you using? I was going to say, why are you even using a fake passport to get into a country if you're
John,
Ronaldinho?
You're jumping around different things like you're Dennis Rodman here. Give me a second. Maximum security prison for a guy who is using a fake passport doesn't seem to fit.
No.
At all.
No.
So I don't think they were very worried about Ronaldinho, with a shiv, going to go stabbing people in the maximum security prison, so they could let him sign some autographs and take some pictures with him. I mean, he's playing foot volley, he's playing futsal. It's all good. You're not worried about Ronaldinho causing problems. And then second, why are you using a fake passport? Because you're a dummy.
Yes. Here's a gift of a fake passport. I accept.
Well, he doesn't have his passport because it was claimed by the Brazilian government for other issues that he's had in Brazil. So, it's not like he's, all of a sudden a new dummy. He's been a dummy for a little while, and this just added to the dumbness.
Yes. We have folks who have chimed in on the Twitters this morning.
What do we have on the Twitters this morning?
Kefsey says, only ever heard AZ, but cannot claim to know all countries' pronunciation. I just saw a recent video they posted in Dutch saying the same.
Yeah, I don't know. I've only heard AZ. That's what I've always heard it referred to, and it always kind of makes me laugh because Zed, haha. And that was the reason why in the song by All Saints, where she's singing, this was in the late 90s pop song, and she's singing something about, a line like from A to Z. She says from A to Z, and she makes it rhyme. And I'm like, oh, I get it. Azad Elkmar. English. Zed. Cool. They rhymed with Zed. Everybody else is like, what the hell is she talking about?
Well, I mean, for me, with my time in Canadian television, that's what they do. They don't do Z, they do Z. So, like, when you're watching an ad for a car and it's the Ford Escort ZX2, that's how it was done in the ad. So, Canada does Z when it comes to all of their pronunciations of Z and anything associated with it.
Well, that's understandable.
Queen's English and all that.
Yeah.
Katie Weaver this morning.
You called him AZ Alkmaar. You
but
went against your Canadian training.
I've just always thought of it as AZ Alkmaar. I had never heard of AZ.
I wonder sometimes how much you actually listen to all the games you watch.
I listen to the games I watch.
I don't know.
I don't put that up for debate. That's your QOD, everybody. How much of the game do I actually watch?
How much does John actually absorb when he's got his 45 games on every weekend?
Bang. Katie Weaver. Katie read an Athletic article over the weekend about how points per game is not a fair way to settle seasons if they're cut short. The author proposed a more robust system using remaining schedule strength, home and away simulations. It's an interesting thought experiment, but is soccer about to become the BCS?
Yeah, if it goes that route, it will, and it can't. Look, nothing's going to be the most fair because if you do points per game, I mean, that would be more fair than total points where you have a different number of games played. That's a fact. But if you do points per game and you have one team that has 3 games remaining with the top 3 teams in the league that they have not played, and you have the other team that's played all those teams and their last 3 games are against the bottom 3 teams in the league, well, then they're kind of at a disadvantage with what they had left. And the other team is at an advantage for strength of schedule. So I understand the logic behind it, but I don't think you can actually pull it off. Like, if you go full BCS, people are going to lose their minds. Like, people will absolutely lose their minds in some of these countries. And I don't blame them because I've lost my mind about the BCS before.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was 2004, Georgia, that the year where they had to go play Hawaii in the Sugar Bowl and beat the brakes off of Hawaii because they
Colt Brennan
probably should have been in the national championship game, but BCS and all that. I mean, if that's what you're down to, you're screwed. You're gonna have to figure out a way to solve it on the field, and that's what we've talked about. So, first priority needs to be to finish the current seasons. If you cannot do that, can you have some form of a playoff? You're still going to get to a point where you're going to have, more than likely, some situations about who gets into the playoff like this. And that's going to be somewhat unavoidable. But you're going to have to figure out a way to do that. It's better than just saying we're not going to play. It's better than what the Dutch did with seasons null and void. That's the worst way to solve any of it. It's better than saying, well, the season counts and we're going to do promotion relegation, but we're going to use just points per game, et cetera, et cetera. Like, having at least, we can't finish the season, but we can have a playoff. That seems to be the best way to solve it if you have to get in that situation.
Nathan Pugh is in this morning. He says he is sad that the hashtag 2017 free burrito match has been eliminated.
Yeah, it lost in the greatest win series, but this is where it was getting really difficult, and there were some tough choices. I'm scrolling back through it now because they are all wrapping up as we speak. And
how much time do they have left to vote?
There's no more time. I just said they're wrapping up as we speak. I think
You
they're
said wrapping.
all...
You did not say wrapped.
0 minutes left, John. If you
That's a
can
wrap.
get in there real quick. I think the last ones are done. Okay, so in the final 8 now, it is MLS Cup win. Kind of a giant duh. The playoff win at home against New York City, second leg of the Eastern Conference semifinal 2018. That beat out the win at the LA Galaxy. Okay. The playoff win at Yankee Stadium, one really big over the 2017 win at Bobby Dodd against NYC. I was a little surprised at the margin there. The 2017 win at Minnesota in the snow beat the win against Monterrey, second leg of CONCACAF. 60-40, that was a little bit closer than I expected.
Okay.
The playoff win against the Red Bulls beat the U.S. Open Cup semifinal 66.1%. I'm really surprised by the margin. That semifinal win against Orlando, this was a tough matchup for it, but that win is a very underrated win in Atlanta United's history because they went down there without Joseph and dominated the game.
Yep.
That was one of the most impressive wins of 2019. The next one, the Campeones Cup win, won huge over the regular season win at Portland a few days later. Kind of funny that they got paired up with one another. The Open Cup final win destroyed the free burrito match. Sorry, Nathan Pugh. 90%. Not surprised. I mean, it's a final. It's winning a trophy. The closest one, and I'm really surprised at how close it was. 50.8%. So just 0.8%. 2018 at San Jose over 2018 at Orlando, where Joseph broke the goal-scoring record. That win and that goal, because that goal won the greatest goal competition, that game has a lot more meaning in the fan base than I would have expected. Because to me, it was a good win. It was a good game. It was a really good game. But the win in San Jose is higher on this list for me. I'm surprised how close that was.
Yeah, 5 stripes after dark. I mean, yeah, so that was a 1.6% margin. So that's got to be just a handful of votes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's wow. But that's a tough matchup, though. You'd like to think that both of those would be making deep runs.
I would have never guessed that the win in Orlando would have been that close to the win in San Jose.
Yeah. All right. So what are the matchups now going forward?
Well, that's to come. You have to go check my Twitter at Longshoot later today.
See, there you go. All right. See, there it is. Let's see. Nathan's second point. It's promising that Italy is beginning to think ahead. The States will be more of a logistical nightmare with politics and varying data. I do feel a lot more optimistic today, though.
Yeah, I mean, just the longer this goes, the more you start to see at least the thought process of how things are going to get back to this level. And yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation. I think overall for the game, I feel more optimistic because, with Italy feeling like they can actually start to draw up a plan that makes you feel pretty good because they were hit as hard as anybody in Europe. So that's good that they have gotten to that point. Other countries, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, England now is looking at, I think, still mid to late June before resuming games. Germany is the one to watch because if they're able to get on the field here in early May, they would be the first of the major leagues to do so.
And then Nathan's C point this morning, up the Reds, John, that is all.
Yes, of course.
Thomas Gwynn, going through the substitution rule that we were discussing with him earlier, he says, if that rule applies through 2021, I wonder if it will end up being a bit of a sticky rule, even if it's theoretically temporary. The halftime sub is an interesting point. That would not be an additional stoppage in play. So 3 running clock subs and 2 halftime should be allowed.
Yeah, I still don't like the idea of just 3 running clock subs. I think you can handle that and still be okay. But I'm kind of with Thomas here. Once you open that up, I wonder if you're going to pull it back. I wonder if you're then going to say, well, okay, now we're going to go back to 3 subs. I don't know if you can necessarily. I mean, of course you can. You can just say that's how it is, but I don't know if you can comfortably do that. I think once you go there and once managers start thinking that way and players get accustomed to it, I think you might be more likely to stick with it. I do. Or maybe there's a compromise and you go to 4. I don't know. It is one of the most restrictive sports in terms of substitutions. I mean, it's really difficult to manage, and fitness comes into play, and limited amount of influence from a manager to change a match with substitutions. I wonder if this will open up that door and allow leagues in the game to stick with it. I kind of think it might.
And then Thomas says, what? The worry shouldn't be about the ball. It should be about the guys breathing in each other's faces during every single set piece?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking... But see, and then that's the same thing. Like, if that's where we're at, then you can't play games. Like, my feeling on it is the testing, obviously, is a huge part of it.
Yep.
The consistent testing. If you go to the lengths of some kind of a lockdown for teams, players, staff, whatever, then that will help mitigate these fears, because you have to be able to play the game. You can't do the thing that I don't remember which league it was talking about. We won't have jostling on the ball or any of that. Like, no, you can't do that. You have to play the game as you play the game. And set pieces and jostling on corner kicks and all of the normal things that happen in a game, you can't be worried about it and play. We have to get to a point that we're not thinking about that, and people can play because you assume that everybody is not infected with the virus and everybody's okay to play. Then you play. If they're not, you can't ensure that they're not, then you don't. And this whole, sterilizing the ball and sterilizing, no, that you're not ready to play. If that's where your head's at with this stuff, you can't play. You have to do everything to create the safe environment to where you can play the game as the game is intended to be played. When you create those kinds of modifications for it, and you can't function that way. You can't play that way. And that would be even more of a competitive imbalance issue for me if you come back and play with saying things like, well, you can only have 3 attacking players and 3 defending players inside the 18 on a corner kick because we don't want players jostling too much. Like, if you start creating that kind of thought process, that's affecting the game more than substitutions or anything like that. You're not ready to play if that's the case.
Chris Hutchison says you could feed the watering system a dilute bleach solution. It might kill grass too, however.
Yeah, there's that. And then, who knows? I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to stay away from that one.
And Tafka says, I was just going to ask, could they not just say open transfers until blank date when it's presumed that next season can be back on track?
I mean, you could. And that's probably going to be the best way to do it. But you still just have the issues with... I think what you would do, you wouldn't say open it for everybody until that date. You would say they're not closed until that date. because you wouldn't have leagues with an open transfer window before their season is done. Like we've talked about. I mean, the players who have signed pre-contracts like Ziyech, you might be able to get around it by not registering them in the league. Their contract is valid, but their player registration is not available to Chelsea until the next season starts. But you're not going to allow a team to say, well, because Germany might finish early, the transfer window is open in England, and yes, we know that there's still 5 games left in the season, but go ahead, transfer window's open, and a team trying not to get relegated would then get the possibility to go make a big purchase and bring a player in and not get relegated, and you're affecting the competitive balance again. I think the idea that Tafka says you'd revise it to where it doesn't open in leagues until their 2019-2020 season is completed. I mean, it could be the next day transfer window opens. But you would have to set a mandatory close date across Europe, and you'd have to set it as far back in the 2020 calendar as you think every league would be, back in action. And that might just mean that for this season, you've got the transfer window open until October, November, whatever. Like, that might be the reality. And if that's the reality, that's the reality. You just try to balance it across everybody as best as you can. In terms of the financial implications of all of this, I think that's probably the best way to do it anyway. Because you're going to get some teams that might get through the short term here, but then getting ready for the next season might have financial issues. And if they have the ability to sell a star player to balance the books or to be able to, pay their roster for the season or whatever, then give them that opportunity, even if it's awkward, even if the transfer window for some leagues is open for a month into the new season or 6 weeks or 2 months. If it is, it is. That just might be where you're at this time. But I don't think you open it for everybody until the current season is completed.
Chris Hutchison says, WTF do you have to do to get Brazil to confiscate your passport and not be able to bribe your way out of it? Jeez.
That's a good question. Especially when you're Ronaldinho. Let's see. I remember reading about it, but I don't remember what he did. I want to say it was tax money.
That's what I thought. It was tax evasion, yeah.
I think it was. Everything I'm coming up. Oh, here we go. It's from an awful website with a thing that rises in the morning. But Ronaldinho was forbidden from selling 57 properties after skipping fines and other debts. Both his Spanish and Brazilian passports have been confiscated after he was slapped with a financial penalty for failing to pay debts for building a pier at his lake house in Brazil. So it's not even like taxes. Oh, no, there is some taxes too. But it's unpaid environmental fines. 2.06 million pounds reportedly. There were other taxes included in it, but it was these environmental fines for building a pier at his house. And the player's assets were under restriction. He had 57 properties.
Yeah, I was going to say, how can you, leverage a property, sell property to get you that 2.06?
Well, I don't know, but he lost
57 properties?
I mean, they might be like, I don't know what all they are. I don't have the list, but yeah, he was fined for building a pier at his lake home.
And Ricky Ricardo says, wanted to know if you meant 07 Georgia when it came to the BCS.
Was it 07? I couldn't remember.
Yeah. And yeah, they should have. And he says that, yeah, they should have played for a natty.
Okay. I mean, if you're taking the best teams, yeah, they should have. But they then took it out on Hawaii, and it was sad.
Yeah, well, Hawaii, I remember Hawaii and Colt Brennan. That was the I want to say that was like the '03 Sugar Bowl.
That's what I was thinking.
Because I remember having to
2008
stay up.
Sugar Bowl, they beat Hawaii too, and
Okay.
they did beat Hawaii twice. That's right. That was where my confusion was.
Okay. Because I remember in my days of affiliate television having to stay up late after the Sugar Bowl was done, and they whacked Colt Brennan in Hawaii, and Bruce Thornton, I think, had a big game in that first one.
Ah,
The pride of LaGrange High School.
yeah. This was the last game for June Jones in Hawaii in January 1st, 2008.
Yeah. Oh, and to answer your salary cap question,
Yes.
it was the NBA 84-85. The players and owners for a decade were jockeying over the owners eliminating the reserve clause for non-rookie contracts. And then 84-85, they eliminated the reserve clause, but then created a salary cap of $3.6 million.
Back in the day.
A soft salary cap. Then cap was introduced in the NFL in 1994. After the lockout in the National Hockey League 04-05 was when they introduced their hard cap.
Ah. I knew the NBA had it in the 80s because, the Bird Rule. Like, that was
Yes.
the whole idea, and it was when Larry Bird was still playing, so... And it was a soft cap. Other leagues have went hard cap, and, the NBA cap, I think if you're looking at a model, I will take that one. I think it makes the most sense. It's soft to where, teams do have control. If they want to spend more money, they just got to put more money back into the pot to do it. You've got some ability to re-sign your own players, which I really like having as a factor in it. And now it's tied to revenues for the league. It's a percentage. And that, to me, is the fairest way of doing all of it. I hope MLS gets to the point that that's where your cap looks like. They've got to get more revenues coming in to where it makes sense to tie everything to revenue and then go to this kind of cap. I think if you can make that step in the next, maybe the next CBA or the CBA following that, after the effects of the 26 World Cup, of course, assuming you bounce back and everything from this and get back to a semblance of normal quickly, then, yeah, I hope that's the next step, is model what the NBA cap has done. Because I think it's the best salary cap structure in sports.
Yeah. We mentioned salary caps and things like that. Did you see the article in the Daily Mail by Amitai Winehouse about the championship and how crazy it is, their financial situation?
I did not, but I'm ready for chaos.
All right. So Winehouse in the copy says the championship comes with both the biggest prize and financial risk. And so consequences can be huge.
I'm going to pause right there for a second. The biggest prize. Kind of. In a one-off, like the whole idea of the championship final and it's the most expensive game in sports and all that stuff. Sure, it's a big game. It's a big deal. You get a big check. The Champions League is a bigger prize. Winning the Premier League is a bigger prize. There are far bigger prizes. The problem that I think sometimes the championship creates is this idea that it is the biggest prize. No, it's a temporary thing, and it's a cash injection. It's a one-time cash injection. That's what it is. It's not the combination of what a top flight league title is, or a Champions League title, or a Europa League, or any of that. It's not what that truly means. It is the biggest prize based off where you're at and what revenues are like in the championship versus what they are in the Premier League if you win that game. That's what it is. And I think over-romanticizing it to make it more is part of the problem, why you have a bunch of teams that are spending themselves into oblivion to try to get this mythical chunk of money that doesn't always solve everything.
Evidence therein. Visible did the study. VYSYBLE. One team spent 194% of their annual turnover on staff costs in 2018-2019. No club brings in even 10 million pounds in TV money without parachute payments, 1/10 of the lowest earning Premier League side. Wigan survived on revenue of 11 million pounds last season, finishing just 2 places behind a team that brought in 7 times that figure.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me touch on a couple of things there. So, first off, you want to know the difference when you get relegated? Take parachute payments out of it because they don't last forever. Here's the difference. You've got the bottom team in the Premier League because the TV money is divided up based off placement in the table. That's part of the factoring in here. But you've got the bottom team in the Premier League in TV money making 10 times, correct? Because the championship one was 1/10. So 10 times what a championship team makes. And we're not talking 10 times like $5. You want to just break it down to that? That is the difference. You're talking about the difference between roughly 10 million and 100 million. I think it's more than that, actually. I think the bottom Premier League team makes more than that. I might be wrong. I thought they made more. But let's say that's what it is. 10 million and 100 million. $90 million. That is the revenue of an MLS club. That's the difference in TV money in the Premier League and the Championship. Why do the Championship teams make less money? That's why. It's that simple. So why do many Championship teams spend like their Premier League teams, but there's no way to have the revenue? Because there's no way to replace that TV money. Like, when you just get to the logistics of it, it makes no sense. The reason why teams that get relegated do is they have that parachute payment coming in. So they have a significant amount of revenue more than the teams around them. And they have to take advantage of it, or they're going to go out of business. It's really that simple. The parachute payment, I'm assuming when it was created, when the idea of it was created, the idea was, well, they're not making that TV money anymore, and it wasn't as big of a gap as it used to be, or it was, it's a larger gap now than it used to be. But you still created this to try to soften the blow. It was not to give teams the opportunity to outspend everybody and earn their way back in. I don't think. It was because you didn't want yo-yos, and that's what a lot of teams are turning into. You wanted teams to say, all right, you have the potential of not getting back into the top flight and not getting that sweet, sweet TV money. So here's what you need to do. This parachute payment, you need to put it in the bank.
Yeah.
You need to put it in the bank. You need to build a good team. You need to try to win your way back. But this parachute payment, you need to put it in the bank. Maybe keep a little bit of it into the roster, into your spending for the year. But you need to keep that money in the bank. So you're going to be okay. And what do the clubs do? They go to Crazy Ed's Wholesale, and they spend every dollar they can, and then every other dollar that they might potentially get if they get promoted. So they're double spending it. And then if they don't get promoted while the parachute payments last, they're screwed. Then you're Bolton. And that's a bad place to be.
The team that spent 194% of their annual turnover on staff costs in 2018-2019. Jessica Charman might know them.
Gee.
Reading.
Why? I mean, like, and what this was what season? I'm sorry?
18-19.
18-19. Where did they finish in 18-19?
They did not finish at the top.
I mean, they didn't finish.
They were lower third.
I was about to say, they didn't finish even close. So, first off, whoever spent that money should be fired and should have been fired on the spot. Like, there shouldn't have even been a question. They spent almost twice as much as they brought in
Mm-hmm.
on just the roster and the staff. Like, there's other expenditures, too. This is just on this part of it.
They finished in 20th place out of 24 teams, 7 points clear from relegation to League One.
How, in the bluest of blue hells, do you spend twice as much money as you bring in? I would assume they were spending more than quite a few other teams around them.
Mm-hmm.
And finish 20th out of 24. How do you even possibly manage to screw it up that much? And the problem is, you don't really get a bunch of years to screw it up that way. You have probably, by that one season of horrendously screwing up the financials and the performance on the field, you have probably doomed the club. Period. Like, you ain't coming back from that.
Mm-mm.
Because you don't have another bucket of your revenue that just magically appears and, oh yeah, the next year we'll make twice as much as we spend. That's not going to happen. Not in the championship. So, good job. Good try. Thanks for ruining the club.
And we mentioned Wigan. Wigan finished 2 points higher, or 2 places higher than Reading. 5 points higher. Wigan survived on a revenue of $11 million.
But Wigan was coming from the other direction, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Because
they were coming from League One.
You know, they were a Premier League team, and then they went through their relegation process after being very conservative in their spending in the Premier League, which probably gave them cushion, because I would assume that if they weren't spending, you know, crazy money like a lot of clubs have, they might have actually pocketed some of that and put it in the bank. And then when they dropped, okay, they dropped again, which is scary. But maybe they were able to keep the revenues in some form of balance, or if they didn't, they learned from that and said, well, we can't do that again. So they spent very little money and were better than the team that was spending twice as much as their revenue. But they were coming up doing that. That's a big difference.
Yeah, they were coming up. Stoke finished 2 places ahead of Wigan in the table, and because of parachute payments, they brought in 7 times the Wigan figure.
Well, then that's fine, but how much did they spend?
Right, that's in the visible study that I do not have in front of me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like they brought in more. Did they spend it and still get that same place? Because if they did, then you're back in Reading territory, and you don't need to be running a team.
No. Hull, and clubs get 3 years of parachute payments after relegation to offset costs and things like that. So Hull, relegated in 2017, got £40 million from TV and media in their most recent accounts, which made up for 82.6% of their income.
Okay,
Middlesbrough,
so their last parachute payment that they were going to get, that's what was 80-something% of their income?
so if they were relegated 2016, 2017, so 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. This year would be their last.
Okay, so they're second. So
Yeah,
but that's a
second
significant
parachute
drop, because I think your first parachute payment's around $100 million.
Yeah.
I thought anyway. So if you're getting 40 in the second one, your last one is, you know, just a little sliver. So if that was 80-something% of your revenue, you're not making a whole lot else. But you've also got to make the most of that by either putting it in the bank or getting back to the Premier League, and they're not really in that conversation too closely, are they?
No, they are not.
Yeah.
Then you have other teams like Middlesbrough and West Brom. They have the biggest revenue drivers in the league. It's £70.8 million. Swansea relied on TV as well, and that accounted for more than 70% of their income. And obviously, the article says that figure drops considerably when parachute payments stop or are not included.
Well, yeah, because it's a payment that nobody else gets. I mean,
Yep.
you can't count on it forever. So, like, your clubs that are leading the outside of parachute payments, your clubs that are leading the championship in revenue are your clubs with bigger venues. And bigger venues, you have more match day revenue. You probably have more sponsorship and stuff to go along with it. And that's who's doing it. The clubs that don't draw as well are not making as much money because the TV is not a significant amount. You know, the rest is all pretty similar. It's down to the gate and the sponsorship. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's honestly at the Premier League level, like, you get more of a difference between the placement in terms of the prize money. You do. The higher up the table, you win more money, and that means you have more money to work with the next year. That's significant. But even there, like, game day revenue, sponsorship, that's the main driver to differentiate. The big difference between a Premier League club and a Championship club is the TV money. The TV money is what changes the game completely. And the TV and the exposure is what can drive the sponsorship side. But just from the part you control, the TV money is the significant factor here. And if it's a 10 million versus 100 million difference, and that's for the bottom of the Premier League, then yeah, that's it. And if you keep spending like you are still in the Premier League when you're not in the Premier League and you don't get back up while you have your parachute payments, you're screwed. Unless you just have somebody who can lose the money, which some clubs do. But that doesn't last forever. No.
A couple of different points from what you were talking about just now. The entire championship, 24 teams, splits £119 million per season in TV money. So that's basically just under $5 million a club.
Less than $10 million. Okay.
$5 million a club in TV money. And the highest revenue from TV without solidarity payments generated by Leeds, who've been the team shown the most often by Sky. They earn just over £9 million. And Huddersfield, their first parachute payment since they finished 20th place, relegated from the Premier League, £104 million.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's what it is. That's
Yep.
by the agreement.
Yep. And so we mentioned the Leeds number, and according to the article, that means that they spend 94% of their revenue on staff costs. So that's where they are.
Yeah,
when it comes to money.
if you watch the Leeds, Amazon Prime documentary, then like they're built to get back into the Premier League.
Yep.
So they're spending to try to get there. So they at least have a plan in that regard, and it was always the conversation was, well, if we don't get there at a certain point, we're going to have to cut spending. So at least they had their eyes open about all of it. And, I mean, sure, they made an extra $4 million, a little over $4 million on TV money than everybody else did because they got shown more, because they're a better team. So, I mean, it's a little bit, but that doesn't really change it. But, yeah, they're maxing out their spending because they're trying to get back in the Premier League, and they have the infrastructure to operate in that way. They have the infrastructure that they can be a Premier League club because of the venue, because of the fan base. All that is a factor. Like, Huddersfield is not built to be a long-term Premier League club. They're just not big enough. Bournemouth, same thing. And this gets back to the whole idea of promotion relegation and, are you going to see leagues go away from it at some point? There's going to be plenty of countries that it's going to be almost impossible to do that. But you don't see a Wigan or a Huddersfield stay in the Premier League forever because their clubs are smaller clubs. They are not built to be Premier League clubs. But you also see clubs that are poorly run for a period of time that end up out of the Premier League when they are built to be a Premier League club. Leeds is a prime example. So promotion relegation, like, for the most part, shakes things out to where people should be. And you get clubs going back and forth, and you get success stories, and you always get, smaller clubs punching above their weight for a period of time. But it's always precarious. If the money is a major factor here. And if you do not have the potential to bring in the money like a Premier League club, at some point you're going to run out of your top scouting where you're able to overcome it. You're going to run out of luck. You're going to run out of good results. You're not going to get that bounce off the inside of the post. It's going to bounce off the outside of the post, and it's going to go wide. You're going to have those things go against you, and you're going to go back down. The scary thing is the clubs who don't realize where their base position is. When you are in the Premier League because you had a good run, because you had a young talent that came through, because whatever, you had a great manager, whatever it is. When you get there and you're not that club to sustain it long term, you have to know that. And you have to operate accordingly. That's not to say you tank. That's not at all what I'm saying. But you have to understand, like, hey, we're not built to be here in the long term unless we change who we are. And if you can do that along the way, great. That could be a new owner. That could be a new stadium. There's things that can factor in there. But that's a long-term process. The short term, you have to know we run at the risk of getting relegated every year. So we've got to be smart with our spending. We've got to save money for the rainy day that could be coming. And then if we get relegated, first year, you're going to have a huge advantage because you're going to have a lot more revenue than anybody else, and you've got to use it. If you don't use it there, you've got to be smart. And you've got to then be smart and not do what Leeds did, Portsmouth, Bolton, Wigan. How many clubs went from Premier League to League One in a few years? That's the one you can't do. It's if you get relegated and you're a smaller club and you're probably a second division team anyway, it is what it is. You'd love to go back. You hope you get everything to come into the right, set of situations to do that, but you're a second division team. It's the ones who go from second division team that got into the first division, but then gets relegated and then starts a chain of events to where you end up as a third division team or a fourth division team or out of business. Those are the ones that are unforgivable.
Sunderland.
Yeah. Those are the ones that are unforgivable. You have to know who you are at heart. That doesn't mean you're not trying to be above that. It doesn't mean you're not striving to be bigger, but if you're a Bournemouth and your stadium seats 10,000, it's very hard for you to stay in the Premier League forever. You're really not built that way. Leeds is built to be a Premier League team more than Bournemouth is. It's just the way the club is. You can sustain it for a long period of time if you do things right, but you have a very thin margin for error. And if you lose sight of that, you risk doing long-term damage to the club. And that's the scary element. And that's what you have to avoid. These numbers, they just show you how precarious it can be for some. For a club like Reading, spending twice as much as they bring in on just the roster and staff, not even other costs, you potentially get into a situation like these other clubs that have either gone under or had to go through massive restructuring because you can't sustain that. Not finishing 20th. You can only sustain that if you get promoted, and you then get the giant pot of cash at the end of the rainbow. But that doesn't last forever either. You know, promotion relegation is a very competitive thing. It's a great story. You know, it's a very romantic way of looking at the game. But clubs who don't understand what it really is are the clubs that can potentially go out of business because of it. And that's the scary thing. And now you've had, just like VAR shines a spotlight on the laws of the game because you can see everything clearly. Well, when everybody has their match day revenue taken away for months on end and there's a great unknown, you can see clearly who is in big trouble because of the way they've run their club. And that's going to come to the fore over the next few months as we get past this, because you're going to have some clubs that won't survive it, or won't survive it in their current format, and will need help because of stuff like what Reading did. To spend that much money and not get anything out of it, how are you going to be able to handle this today? That's the scary part of it.
The teams off the top of my head that have done a double drop would be Wigan, Bolton, Blackpool, and Sunderland from Premier League to League One, and although we have seen the rebound of Wigan back to the Championship.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sunderland is the one that really feels like they should not have been a League One team. Like, that club is far bigger than that. Did they do things to put themselves there? Absolutely.
Yes.
But that's even more glaring about mistakes that were made. You know, Blackpool's a small club. A much smaller club than Sunderland. Like, they shouldn't be in the same situation.
Yeah, but Sunderland and massive overspending and getting zero results, and then getting relegated, and then for those of you that watched the first season of Sunderland Till I Die, seeing how it just absolutely fell apart when Ellis Short decided he wasn't going to spend any money after the hemorrhaging and the first drop. Ellis Short wanted to sell and not invest. And so the front office had to figure out how to bring in players on free and things like that. And instead of getting up to back to the Premier League, they end up being relegated again down to League One. And right now they're 7th in League One, just out of the playoff picture on goal difference alone.
Yep. And that's the situations that can happen because you don't have that security, whether it is a salary cap, whether it is a non-promotion relegation structure. And hey, if you don't have promotion relegation, you don't get a Bournemouth, because Bournemouth is on paper not a Premier League club, and they're not able to win their way there. The only way they would get up there is if the Premier League, like we've seen in MLS, expanded and ownership bought their way in. But in the current climate, we're seeing that the structure of an MLS gives it a much more stable footing. Not to say that they're not going to take a hit, not to say that owners aren't going to be hurting, not to say that the league isn't going to be hurting because of this. But they're in a much more stable position to handle what we've seen than some of these other leagues, because they're just not built that way. And you're going to see, more of that situation. An owner saying, you know what, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't weather this. I'm out. Or I'm not going to spend, or whatever. And that's the stuff that's going to happen. Like, in large numbers. I think once we know what the timeline is going to look like, in the Premier League, you've got some clubs that reportedly have started individual training, even with people potentially back in their building for individual work today. Once we kind of know what the timeline looks like, that's going to be the next shoe that'll drop, is you're going to hear some of this from owners that say, well, all that's well and good, but I don't have the money to finish this season. We're broke. And yeah, all that's well and good, and we can finish this season, but I don't have the money to operate next year. I've got to have new investors come in. And where are they? Where are they going to be? Where's it going to come from? That's going to happen. And these types of reports are just preparing you for it, because I just don't see how some of these clubs that have spent so much money and have lost so much money are going to be able to handle this. And we will see what happens. Real quick before we go, the Premier League BBC has a report from this morning. It's called Project Restart. Arsenal, Brighton, and West Ham have opened their training grounds to players for individual work today. They're hopeful of a June 8th restart, finishing at the end of July. This would require full training to begin May 18th. Now that's quick. May 18th to June 8th. That's the shortest period of time that we have seen from full training to games. But if they start individual training now, can you make that work? Perhaps. All games expected to be behind closed doors, obviously, considering making some available free to air on TV. One issue under debate from Friday: what approved stadiums would be used? Would there be a limited number of stadiums, or would it be neutral venues? Still 5 tests for the government that has to be met, including an increase in testing, social distancing guidelines, and it also hinges on the conclusions reached by meetings of senior medical officials from different sports discussing health protocols for competing behind closed doors. Those meetings are set to start this week. So feels like maybe they're pushing pretty fast here, and we'll see if that works. But that's England. Italy, I think we mentioned it, May 4th individual training, May 18th team training as their first steps. That's where those 2 leagues are. Germany is still shooting for the beginning of May for games to restart, and Spain is going to be the last of the major leagues in Europe, and they're not looking at games probably until late June at the earliest. So that's your timeline looking at that. MLS, just the latest is May 15th training moratorium. They said that they weren't going to have games before June 8th. I feel like now with the training moratorium, you're probably looking at later in June before you're even considering games. Pretty much everybody's on that same timeline with USL and Championship and League One and all of that. So that's the timelines. That's where we're at. Anything else on Twitter before we go, John?
Nope, we are clean, mean, and green.
Okay, well, before we go, tell everybody about Steve Apolinsky, please.
Yes, aa-legal.com. Steve Apolinsky and Associates, trial lawyers, more than 30 years of experience for clients in Alabama and Georgia. Wrongful death, serious injury, personal injury, premises liability, nursing home abuse and neglect. Reach out to them a couple different ways. Live chat on the website at aa-legal.com. You can get a free consultation if you request one. You can also reach out 404-377-9191 or hook up with them on the emails at steve@aa-legal.com. Once again recognized as Legal Elite, by Georgia Trend Magazine for being one of the most effective lawyers in Georgia, one of the top 100 trial attorneys in the state as well. Proud supporter of everything Soccer Down here in SDH Network.
Don't do that. That was
Legal
bad.
Elite,
No, just don't. Just don't do that. Not good. All right. Tomorrow we will not have a morning show. I got stuff going on in the morning. I got places I gotta be and things I gotta get done. So to make it up to you, we will have an afternoon watch along. And it's one we've talked about quite a bit. The game that got the United States into the World Cup in 1990. Gwen approves. She's excited. She's been doing her research. It is United States at Trinidad, 1989 in November. U.S. had to win. Trinidad only needed a draw to go to their first World Cup. and we will be watching that on our Twitch channel tomorrow afternoon, twitch.tv/soccer down here. Time, we're probably going to do it late in the day. It might end up being kind of like a happy hour kind of thing, like maybe 4 o'clock. 4 to 6 might be the best time for it. We'll try to have some other stuff between now and then on the podcast channel as well. Some history stuff, some other things going on. So, no live show in the morning, and we'll tweet and remind people too. Watch along tomorrow afternoon, USA, Trinidad and Tobago from 1989. One of the most important games ever played in American soccer. We'll talk about all that tomorrow. Until then, much plati, y'all.
Much plati.